1 second, you're your regular size. The next, you're towering over a skyscraper. And some 40 years later, you're the size of a planet. Yeah, you've been growing astronomically. Soon, you'll become a human bridge between Earth and the moon. That is, if you don't collapse into a black hole. Today, we've got you growing 1 centimeter every second. You'd start at your regular human size. Your height and mass are completely normal. But soon, things on the ground would look further away than they used to. Like your feet. Yeah, after just 1 minute, you've grown 60 centimeters. You're a whole 2 feet taller. And now, you'd be pushing on the ceiling. With every passing minute, you'd be adding 60 more centimeters to your height. Because I don't have to tell you, there are 60 seconds in a minute. And you'd already be 50% heavier. Your new weight would strain your joints and put pressure on the ground beneath your feet. And in just 14 more minutes, which is less time than it'll take you to watch this entire video, you'd shoot right past the 10-meter mark, 33 feet. You'd be the height of a 3-story townhouse. Yeah, you'd have to get outside at this point, unless you wanted to break through a few more ceilings. You would be gigantic, like J.R.R. Tolkien gigantic. I mean, not J.R.R. himself, but one of his characters. You're a freaking hill giant, and you'd weigh a ton. Like, literally, 1 ton. Most residential buildings or even roads wouldn't support your weight anymore. You'd leave cracks in the pavement or collapse small buildings just by leaning against them. Now, in reality, this kind of growth spurt isn't exactly possible because of a little thing called the square cube law. Yeah, this law says that if you grew 10 times taller than you are now, you'd weigh 1,000 times more than what you started with. But there's no way your bones would be able to support all that weight. If you tried to stand up, they wouldn't just break, they'd shatter into powder. Plus, now you'd have 1,000 times more cells. And these cells would be producing 1,000 times more heat. You'd crush and cook your own organs because your body couldn't handle your weight and couldn't dump the heat fast enough, which would be absolutely disgusting. So, we're not going to show that. So, we'll just ignore that law of science, along with, well, every other law of science that would keep you from growing 1 centimeter every second. Let's focus on what your life would be like once you reached 10 meters tall. Well, at this height, you obviously wouldn't fit inside a house because you'd be the size of a house. And soon, things like houses would get even tinier for you. Within 2.5 hours, you'd grow to 93 meters tall. You'd be the size of the Statue of Liberty from ground to torch. Everything below you would look like a tiny little Lego set. Yeah, just you walking around causes the regular-sized humans to panic. Because one wrong step could crush them, along with cars and buses and everything else that gets underfoot. You've got to get out of the city before you start squishing all your neighbors. At this stage, you're basically Godzilla or Kong. You're a full-up kaiju with arms the size of tree trunks. If you wanted to take your frustrations out on people, you could trash entire neighborhoods. Even in your best mood, the pressure from your feet would be way too much for the load-bearing capacity of most ground surfaces. You'd start crushing freeways or cave in the New York City subway tunnels beneath you. And this would be probably right around the time humans would start sending choppers and tanks to make sure you're not hostile. Because the Empire State Building is just across the street. You look very capable of climbing it and swatting planes out of the air. But hey, you had your coffee that morning along with some sort of growth serum, so you'd be chill. Soon, you'd get bigger, way bigger. By the time dawn breaks on your now humongous face, it would be 9 hours since you started skyrocketing. The cool news is that at this height, you'd have very long legs. You could walk and sprint an incredible distance. You could run from one continent to another. By now, you'd be 326 meters tall. That's the size of the Eiffel Tower. At this scale, your legs alone would measure 160 meters. That's 525 feet. So you could walk at 68 kilometers per hour. And if you walked from New York to Paris, the trip would take you 85 hours. But if you ran, you'd be fast. You could sprint at 195 kilometers per hour and reach Paris in just 30 hours. Wild. If you got hungry, though, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything big enough to fill your belly. Forget baguettes. At this height, you'd be eating blue whales. One blue whale at 30 meters in length would look like a hot dog in your hand. Of course, if you started running now and you ended up in France 30 hours later, since you're still growing in that time, you'd grow to be over 1,000 meters. By then, the Eiffel Tower would be knee-high. At this point, you'd be taller than the record-breaking Burj Khalifa in Dubai. That tower is a staggering 828 meters tall. Within just 30 hours of growing at 1 centimeter per second, you'd already be taller than every building on Earth. But you wouldn't stop growing. As you adjusted to life as the world's very tallest person, a week goes by and there's not much to look up to anymore. After 10 days, you'd be 8.6 kilometers tall, which is roughly the height of Mount Everest. Soon, mighty Mount Everest and the rest of the Himalayan mountains would basically come up to your waist. You'd be breathing very thin air at this point. Yeah, you'd be standing where commercial jets cruise. Up here, the air pressure is only about 1/3 that of sea level. You'd be above the clouds, and breathing would be a big problem. Taking a big breath would feel like trying to suck a thick milkshake through a tiny little coffee straw. Remember those plastic little coffee straws? You'd be gasping and dizzy. Your enormous lungs would be screaming for oxygen to feed your billions of cells. You'd likely be stumbling over mountain ranges like a very confused, very lightheaded giant. And your stomach would now be the size of a football stadium. To keep this massive body moving, you'd need millions of calories per minute. But you couldn't just scoop up entire herds of cattle and shove them directly into your mouth just to get a decent snack, so we'll ignore your body problems, just like we ignored that square cube law. You've got so much growing left to do. Hey, I make the rules here. After 116 days, you'd grow to truly titanic proportions, reaching 100 kilometers in height. Your head would clear the border into space, or as scientists like to call it, the Kármán line. That's the boundary between our atmosphere and outer space. Within 15 months, you would reach the height of 400 kilometers. You'd be tall enough to see the International Space Station zip by your head, maybe catch it in your mouth. Now, if we were tracking things like temperature and vacuum and solar radiation and their impact on a 400-kilometer tall human body, it'd get pretty gross. Because every part of Digipeater sticking out of the atmosphere would be subjected to the cold vacuum of space. And while I'm getting used to Digipeater dying in weird ways, I don't really want to look at the frozen, vacuum-exploded, sunburnt head of Digipeater if I don't have to. So let's keep ignoring physics here and look further down the road. What happens if you keep growing at this rate for decades? Well, shortly after your first decade of professional growing, at 11 years, you would be 3,470 kilometers tall, which is an interesting milestone because at this point, you'd be as tall as the moon is wide. So, congratulations, you'd officially be as big as a small celestial object. Well, seeing as you'd still be standing on Earth, you couldn't actually reach out and touch the moon. Not yet, but after 4 decades of growing at 40 years, you'd be moving in the right direction. That's when you become a planet. Yeah, you'd be as big as Earth, planet-sized, 12,614 kilometers tall. If you lay down, you'd stretch from one side of Earth to the other. Except you no longer fit on Earth's surface. Your foot alone would cover entire countries, continents even. And depending on where you placed it, you could destroy these continents. In reality, if we bring laws of physics back into the equation, at Earth size, well, your own gravity would collapse you into a spherical blob. You'd be a small, fleshy planet. Yeah, no one needed to see that. So let's, once again, ignore the laws of physics and keep you the same human shape as you started. You would be so large that your gravity field would start affecting nearby objects. You'd start pulling satellites and debris into orbit around you. After 444 years, you'd be the diameter of Jupiter. You'd be as tall as 11 Earths. You'd also outweigh our planet by a significant margin. You wouldn't really be standing on Earth anymore. Earth and everyone around it would essentially be resting on you as the two of you orbit around the sun. Hopefully, you could find a way to hold it gently without destroying it. By the end of the millennium, 1,000 years after you started your incredible growth, you'd become bigger than any planet in the universe. Your eyes alone would be the size of the moon. You could use Earth as a tennis ball and the moon as a marble. Your growth would start to be measured against planetary distances. After 1,220 years, well, you'd be 384,740 kilometers tall. That's the distance between Earth and the moon. So you could actually place your feet on Earth and your head would touch the moon. You could use your body to bridge the two. People down on Earth could voyage back and forth on your body, though it would still require driving nearly 400,000 kilometers one way. This would be a really weird time for you because you wouldn't be as big as a moon or a planet. At this point, you'd be star-sized. After another few millennia, 4,400 years, you would be 1.38 million kilometers tall, which is the diameter of the sun. You'd now become a star being. At 109 times Earth's diameter, you could hold all the planets of the inner solar system in the palm of your hand. Your mass would also rival the sun's. Depending on where you were standing or floating, your gravity would distort planetary orbits, pulling objects toward you. Our solar system would essentially become a binary star system where all the planets and moons and asteroids would orbit both the sun and you. Okay, to reach the next stages of growth, well, you'd have to leave humanity and their short lifespans behind and settle in to grow in outer space for millennia, even eons. Within 476,000 years, you would reach 150 million kilometers from toe to scalp. To astronomers, That's an important measuring stick distance known as the astronomical unit. It basically stands for the distance from the Earth to the Sun. That's right, if you stood at the center of the Sun, your head would scrape Earth's orbit. Of course, standing on the Sun wouldn't really be standing when your foot alone would be 20 times longer than the Sun is wide. After that, time itself would scale. You wouldn't be thinking in terms of seconds or hours or days. You would be thinking in terms of millions of years. To go from being 5 foot something to the size of the largest known star, UY Scuti, would take 9.5 million years. Yeah, you'd grow to be over 2.4 billion kilometers in length. You'd be a stellar-sized giant, literally comparable to a hypergiant star. Any normal star would just seem like a dot to you. And within 29 million years, you would be 9 billion kilometers or 60 astronomical units in height, which is just absurd. You'd be solar system sized. 60 astronomical units is roughly the diameter of Neptune's orbit, meaning you could stand near the sun and get your hair parted by Neptune. Beyond that, you'd go interstellar, and you'd need to start thinking about your life in terms of billions or even quadrillions of years. In 30 billion years, you'd be 1 light year tall. And in 3 quadrillion years, your elongated body would be 100,000 light years tall. That is galaxy-sized, about as big as the Milky Way. Your body would span tens of billions of star systems. When Carl Sagan said we are all made of star stuff, this is kind of what he meant. You would be so huge that you'd be full of stars. And now for some perspective. Growing that gigantic at a rate of 1 centimeter every second would take you a long time. 200,000 times longer than the current age of the universe, which is only 13.8 billion years old. It would take a long time to catch up to all these light years because, well, you'd be growing at 1 centimeter per second and light is going at 300,000 kilometers per second. Still, if you kept at it for long enough, well, eventually you'd be bigger than the biggest black holes, bigger than the biggest galaxy clusters, and you'd be the height of the known universe. Yeah, after just 2.8 sextillion years, which is 200 billion times the age of the universe, you'd finally be all grown up, topping a whopping 93 billion light years tall. You'd be at the ultimate size milestone, the hypothetical limit of size, the size of the observable universe. Your mass would curve space itself. You alone would define your own space-time. Of course, it would take so long to grow that big that galaxies would have drifted away, stars would have burnt out, protons would have decayed to nothing. Yet, there you would stand, a cosmic giant drifting through the cosmos. Sounds peaceful, almost like floating in the Bodhi's void. Ever wonder what it would be like to drift through a place where there's no stars for hundreds of light years? Well, that's a story for another What If.